The single worst thing you can hear in the Galactic Council chamber, besides, "The emergency nutrient paste dispenser is on fire again," is your own name. Specifically when it is shrieked by a 9-foot-tall avian politician whose throat sac is inflated to the size of a prize-winning melon and whose crest, shifting from venomous purple to angry crimson, was fanned out in a display of pure, unadulterated rage. "Dr. Flynn!" I flinched, my own small, amphibious body seeming to shrink under the weight of that sound. My webbed fingers, a dead giveaway for Glimmerfin anxiety, began to flutter uncontrollably at my sides. High Counselor Gorthak of the Pompadouri, head of the Annihilation and Enforcement Committee, and a being whose entire career was built on loud, dramatic certainty, was pointing a single, accusatory talon at the main holographic display. On it, a small blue and green planet, newly discovered in an uninteresting spiral arm, was blinking ominously, an angry red. "Explain this obscenity!" Gorthak boomed, his voice echoing through the cavernous chamber. I cleared my throat, the sound a pathetic little squeak in the wake of his bellow. "High Counselor, as my preliminary report stated, the designation is merely the native name for the third planet in the Sol system. It's a phonetic coincidence, I assure you." Gorthak's crest feathers ruffled, a sign of escalating fury. "A coincidence? They named their world Terra." He spat the word as if it were poison. It hung in the air, sizzling with perceived malice. The threat assessment phonetics filter, a paranoid piece of software I'd been trying to get decommissioned for years, had dutifully flagged the sound-alike word from our most sacred texts. Terra? Terror. To the Council's cheap, overzealous software, they were one and the same. "A declaration of war!" Gorthak bellowed, his throat sac vibrating with righteous indignation. "A promise of what they intend to visit upon the entire galaxy. That name is a declaration of their intent." There it was, the exact sequence of panicked logic I had dreaded. A junior archivist flags a phonetic match, the report gets kicked up the chain, and by the time it reaches Gorthak, a new species has gone from potentially interesting to genocidal maniacs preparing to grind our bones into dust. Gorthak puffed up his chest, drew in a mighty breath, and unleashed his signature cry, a phrase so ingrained in the Council's political theater it had lost all meaning, and become pure sound and fury. "SPQR!" The cry echoed, filled with millennia of assumed gravita. It was supposed to mean, "for the glory of the Founders," or something equally noble. To me, it just sounded like someone trying to clear their throat of a stubborn fishbone. "High Counselor," I tried again, stepping forward onto the designated respondent's disk. "The probability of a true semantic link is astronomically low. The word might likely mean something in their native tongue that's benign, perhaps blue-green sphere, or mostly harmless." Gorthak sneered, a terrifying expression on a beak designed for cracking open hard-shelled mollusks. "Benign? Dr. Flynn, your naivete is a liability. The Founders' words are never a coincidence. The sacred concordance is clear. A threat that names itself must be met with overwhelming conviction." He was quoting legal precedent derived from a text no one fully understood. A common and infuriating tactic. I had to stop this. An entire fleet of Annihilator-class warships was currently on standby, their crews polishing doomsday devices, just waiting for Gorthak's order. I had one card left to play. It was a long shot, a bureaucratic nightmare that would bury me in paperwork for years, but it was better than extinction. "Then, I invoke Clause 28B of the First Contact Charter," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "The right to a final diplomatic inquiry. I request permission to lead a small, non-threatening vessel to the Sol system to confirm the alleged hostiles' intentions before any irreversible action is taken." A hush fell over the chamber. Clause 28B was rarely used. It was seen as a sign of weakness, a procedural delay that questioned the wisdom of the council's leadership. Gorthak's beady eyes narrowed. He saw the trap. Denying the request would be a breach of the very regulations he claimed to uphold. But granting it, he smiled, a slow, cruel smile. He saw the opportunity. "Granted," he boomed, the word dripping with condescension. "Lead your inquiry, Doctor. Go and confirm the barbarism of these terrorists." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carried across the entire chamber. "And when your Glimmerfin idealism is shattered against the rocks of their depravity, the council will be waiting, and I will be signing your performance review." He straightened up, his crest flaring once more. "SPQR!" he roared, a final, triumphant declaration. I just stood there, my fingers fluttering, a single thought echoing in my mind. I had just volunteered to be the only thing standing between a trigger-happy bureaucracy and a planet that had no idea it had just been sentenced to death, because its name sounded a bit scary. The diplomatic vessel, inquisitive gesture, was a study in beige. Beige walls, beige consoles, beige uniforms. It was designed to be as unthreatening as possible. A vessel that screamed, "We are only here to fill out forms." It perfectly matched my mood. I sat in my small, beige office, staring at the case file on my datapad. It was a monument to cascading stupidity. The whole mess had started, as most galactic crises did, with an intern. My intern, Pib. He had been running a routine deep space scan for potential resource-rich systems when his software picked up a structured, complex radio signal from the Sol system. Per procedure, he initiated a passive linguistic analysis. The standard issue translator suite, a collection of the lowest bidding software packages in the known universe, had sprung into action. The literal translator identified the planet's name, broadcast in dozens of their languages as Earth, Terra, and so on. The paranoid threat assessment phonetics filter immediately flagged Terra for its 97.4 phonetic match to the word terror in the sacred tongue of the founders. Then the real chaos agent got involved. The Cultural Context Engine, a widely mocked program known for its hilariously cynical interpretations. It took terror, and cross-referenced it with the newly intercepted broadcasts. The result was a report that painted humanity as a species of bloodthirsty monsters who named their planet after their favorite pastime. I had spent 3 years trying to get the Cultural Context Engine uninstalled from all official vessels. My petition was currently number 4812 in the queue for the Subcommittee on Approved Software Revisions. A polite chime announced an incoming priority message. Gorthak's face appeared on my screen, his feathers impeccably preened. He was in his office, a scale model of an Annihilator-class warship prominently displayed behind him. "Flynn!" His voice boomed from the small speaker. "Status update!" "Hi, Counselor," I said, trying to keep my fingers from drumming on the desk. "We have just entered the vessel's acceleration phase. We're on schedule to reach the target system in 3 jumps." "Excellent. I trust you are preparing yourself for the inevitable disappointment." "I am preparing for a thorough and objective inquiry, High Counselor." "Of course you are," Gorthak sneered. "Just remember, the Annihilation Fleet is a very swift and very expensive instrument. It gets restless when it's not being used. Do not fail. Your performance review is pending." The screen went blank. I slumped back in my chair, the beige seeming to close in around me. My career hung in the balance, secondary to the fate of an entire species. A species I was about to accuse of cosmic terrorism based on the inner office equivalent of a typo. I just don't understand, Doctor," I looked up from my analysis of a human broadcast, apparently a religious service dedicated to the deification of processed meats called a barbecue, to see my intern, Pib, wringing his webbed hands. He was hovering by the briefing room's holographic projector, which was currently displaying a paused image of two colossal wheeled machines crushing smaller, brightly colored vehicles. "What don't you understand, Pib?"
This ritual, sir. The report from the context engine calls it Ritualistic Vehicular Combat for Dominance Display. But the audio logs are confusing. The assembled crowd cheers for both the victor and the vanquished. And the high priest keeps shouting, "Sunday! Sunday! Sunday!" Is that the name of their war god?
Log it as inconclusive religious fervor. And move on, Pib. I sighed. We need to focus on what matters. Have you finished the preliminary contact paperwork? Pib's large, dark eyes widened in terror. He gestured to a datapad on the table that was radiating an aura of pure, bureaucratic malevolence.
I'm trying, Doctor. I really am. But it's Form 34C.
Of course. The first contact packet. Form 34C. Initial assessment of potentially belligerent species. It was a form so convoluted, so filled with contradictory clauses and absurd hypotheticals, that most xenolinguists believed it was designed to make you give up and recommend planetary annihilation out of sheer frustration. What's the problem? I asked, steeling myself.
It's question 23, subsection C, he stammered. It asks, does the new species homeworld name contain any known existential threats, blasphemous concepts, or crude anatomical references? Check all that apply.
He pointed a trembling finger at the first checkbox.
I don't know what to do. If I check existential threats based on the phonetic match, it automatically files a copy of this form with the Annihilation Committee. If I don't check it, and they are hostile, I could be tried for dereliction of duty under the Gorthak Act of Procedural Zeal.
I felt a pang of sympathy for the terrified young Glimmerfin. He was trapped in the same bureaucratic labyrinth I was. Leave it blank for now, Pib. We'll answer it after we've actually spoken to them. Pib looked immensely relieved.
Oh, thank you, Doctor. Thank you.
He went back to his datapad, his brow furrowed in concentration. A moment later, he looked up again. Doctor? What's a weasel? What?
The context engine reports on their political systems. It keeps flagging the term weasel words as a possible reference to a totem animal used in ritualistic deception?
I put my head in my hands. Pib, I said slowly, for the remainder of this mission, I want you to treat every report from the cultural context engine as if it were a drunken space hauler telling you a story in a disreputable Strappert bar.
So entertainingly false?
Exactly. We arrived at the edge of the Sol system cloaked and cautious, running passive scans. Their spacefaring technology was laughable. They had a few dozen satellites, a single space station orbiting their planet, and a handful of probes drifting aimlessly through the expanse. It was the technological equivalent of a mud hut next to a citadel. Following procedure, I sent the standard automated "Greetings from the Galactic Council" message on a broad, open frequency. The message was designed to be universally understood. Using mathematical constants and basic atomic structures, the expected response was a confused silence, followed by decades of frantic study on their part. Instead, we got a reply in under 20 minutes. A new vessel appeared on our scopes, moving to intercept us from a trajectory near the fourth planet. It was small, asymmetrical, and our sensors indicated its hull was dented. The name painted on its side, in one of their alphabetic scripts, was translated by the literal engine as the Big Dipper.
"They're hailing us, Doctor," the communications officer said, her antennae twitching nervously. "On screen," I ordered, my heart throbbing against my ribs. This was it. First contact. The moment we would meet the terrifying architects of terror. The face that appeared on the main view screen was startlingly pink and fleshy. It was framed by a thatch of white hair and adorned with transparent lenses perched on its nose. The creature was wearing a thick, knitted garment of a depressingly drab brown color. It smiled, revealing a neat row of blunt, white teeth. "Well, howdy there," the creature said, its voice crackling with cheerful energy. "My name's Bob Jenkins. I guess that makes me your welcoming committee. We got your message. Real clever stuff, using the hydrogen line like that. Took us a bit to unscramble that last packet, but we got the gist." The bridge crew of the Inquisitive Gesture stared in stunned silence. There was no fear, no aggression, no bellowing war cries. This Bob Jenkins was looking at our vessel, a marvel of hyper-advanced engineering, with the same casual interest he might give a new model of lawnmower. "He appears unnervingly calm," whispered my tactical officer, a hulking insectoid whose job was to analyze threat postures. "His vital signs are steady. The absence of intimidation could be a sign of extreme confidence in a hidden weapons system." Bob Jenkins leaned closer to his camera. "Oh, sorry about the mess in here," he said, gesturing vaguely behind him. "The grandkids were visiting last week. You folks want to come aboard? I can put a pot of coffee on. Or I just tapped a keg of new oatmeal stout I've been working on. Your call." Coffee. Oatmeal stout? The tactical officer began discreetly activating the ship's defensive energy shields. This creature was speaking in a code we could not begin to comprehend. The first meeting took place in the main briefing room of the Inquisitive Gesture. We had insisted. Our bioscanners needed to ensure Ambassador Jenkins wasn't carrying any planet-killing plagues. He agreed without fuss, stepping onto our teleportation pad with a cheerful wave. Now he stood before us, a small delegation of my most senior and most paranoid staff. Bob Jenkins, in his brown cardigan, looked less like a galactic threat and more like someone who had gotten lost on his way to a gardening club meeting. "As a gesture of goodwill," he said, his smile never wavering, "I brought you a gift." He held up a small ceramic pot, containing a green leafy plant. "It's mint. Peppermint, to be exact. Wonderful for tea. Word of warning, though, it grows like a weed. Plant it in your garden and you won't be able to stop it. It'll take over everything." I saw my xenobotanist, Dr. Fenn, go pale. He discreetly raised his scanner and took a reading. I saw his facial plates retract in agitation as he whispered urgently to the head of security. The security officer, a pillar of stony silence, stepped forward, encasing the pot in a miniature stasis field, and carried it away as if it were a thermonuclear device. Bob watched it go, looking mildly confused. Okay, guess you folks are serious about quarantine." Undeterred, he then presented two other items. The first was a large, brown bottle filled with a dark liquid. "And this is that oatmeal stout I was telling you about. Home brewed. The secret's in the yeast. You gotta treat your yeast right, you know. It's a living thing." Just as my science officer was about to ask what yeast was, the ship's cultural context engine, which I had forgotten to mute, chose that moment to chime in. Its synthesized voice, full of smug authority, echoed through the room. "New cultural artifact detected. Beer. Cross-referencing with archive data on early societal rituals. Interpretation. A mildly corrosive, mind-altering, social lubricant. Used to lower inhibitions for ritualized combat, procreation, communal howling, or all three at once." Bob blinked. "Well, I've seen it do all those things at a wedding reception once, but it's mostly for flavor."
Before I could apologize for the interruption, he presented his final gift. It was a glass jar containing a bubbling, beige-colored paste.
"And this," he said, his voice full of pride, "is my sourdough starter. Her name is Eleanor. She's 3 years old. Been in my family for, the 3 years."
"What is it?" I asked, leaning forward cautiously.
"It's a controlled fungal growth I feed with processed grain and water," Bob explained happily. "It's full of wild yeast and lactobacilli. You use it to make bread. The flavor, is fantastic."
The words controlled fungal growth were all my chief medical officer needed to hear. A high-pitched alarm suddenly blared through the briefing room, a full-on biohazard alert. Red lights flashed. 2 security guards, brandishing plasma rifles, took up positions flanking the ambassador. Bob just looked at the flashing lights, then at the sourdough starter, then at the armed guards.
"Is it the name?"
he asked with genuine curiosity.
"Eleanor, is that like name of one of your ancient enemies?"
I slapped my hand on the console, silencing the alarm.
"My apologies, Ambassador,"
I said, my voice strained.
"Our systems are sensitive. Please, have a seat."
The security team reluctantly lowered their weapons, though they continued to eye the folksy human and his collection of apparent bioweapons with a mixture of raw fear and grudging awe. This single, soft-spoken creature had, in the space of 5 minutes, presented us with an invasive planetary subjugation flora, a corrosive social lubricant, and a weaponized fungal colony. Gorthak's paranoia was starting to seem less like political posturing and more like simple common sense. My anxiety levels were now approaching supernova. This unassuming, cardigan-wearing lifeform was either the most diabolically clever warrior I had ever met, or he was exactly what he appeared to be, and my entire civilization was on the verge of making a universe-ending mistake. I had to know. "Ambassador Jenkins," I began, trying to keep my voice even as my security detail continued to aim their rifles at his sourdough starter. "We appreciate the unique gifts, but we have come a very long way for a very specific reason. We must understand the meaning of your world's name. Terra." Bob Jenkins chuckled, a warm, rumbling sound. He leaned back in his chair, completely at ease.
"Oh, that old things. To be honest, most folks just call it Earth these days. Terra is a bit formal, you know? A little old-fashioned."
A tiny spark of hope ignited in my chest. A different name. A formal name, perhaps one only used in ancient, forgotten contexts. This was good. This was something I could work with. "Earth," I repeated. "And what is the meaning of Earth?"
"Well, it's an old Germanic word," Bob said thoughtfully. "Basically means the same thing. The ground beneath our feet. The soil. The land."
My hope flickered. It was the same concept. Still, Earth didn't trigger any phonetic alarms. I could spin this. I could frame Terra as an archaic term no longer in use. "And this older name, Terra," I pressed, needing to close the loop. "Its meaning? Does it have any other connotations? Any historical significance?" I held my breath. The entire fate of his world hung on his answer. Bob Jenkins leaned back in his chair, a fond, nostalgic look on his face.
"Sure does. Comes from an old language. One of our first global tongues, really. Latin. A lot of our scientific and legal terms come from it." He smiled. "As for the meaning, as simple as it gets. Terra just means ground. You know, dirt."
Dirt. The name of their planet was Dirt. My hope surged. This was perfect. Benign, mundane, utterly non-threatening. I could take this back to the council. I could show them how ridiculous they were being. I was already composing the triumphant opening line of my report. And then the universe decided to laugh at me. A blaring, deafening alarm suddenly filled the room, 10 times louder than the biohazard alert. It was the klaxon of the threat assessment phonetics filter, the program at the heart of this whole nightmare. It had been silently monitoring the conversation, and Bob's simple explanation had just provided the final piece of confirmation it needed. A cold, robotic voice overrode the ship's internal address system, devoid of all emotion, but radiating pure, algorithmic certainty.
Alert! Direct confirmation from native source. The word Terra has been logged. Cross-referencing phonetic profile with Sacred Concordance database. Match found. Keyword, terror. Probability of hostile intent, 97.4. Confirmed threat designation logged. Report automatically forwarded to Annihilation and Enforcement Committee.
My blood ran cold. Before the robotic voice had even finished its declaration of doom, my personal datapad pinged with an incoming message. It was from Gorthak. The message contained only a single image, a high-resolution scan of the original document that had started this whole fiasco. The word Terra was circled in red. Below it, Gorthak had typed a single, furious line in all capital letters.
Dirt? They mock us. They name their world after what they will grind our civilization into. Proceed with extreme prejudice. The fleet is en route.
I looked from the message on my datapad to the bewildered face of Bob Jenkins, who was looking around at the flashing lights with an expression of pleasant confusion.
Is that another drill? He asked. You guys run a tight ship, I'll give you that.
I stumbled back to my quarters, the beige walls seeming to mock my utter failure. The Annihilation fleet was on its way. I had not only failed to defuse the situation, I had actively confirmed the Council's worst fears. I was going to be remembered as the Glimmerfin who handed humanity its death warrant. The door chimed and slid open. Pib rushed in, his webbed fingers fluttering so fast they were a blur. He was clutching his datapad like a holy relic. Doctor, I found it! I think I found it! He squeaked, his voice a mix of terror and exhilaration. Found what, Pib? I mumbled, staring at the bulkhead. A loophole in the law of physics? A way to teleport an entire planet to another dimension? 'Cause short of that, we are doomed. No, sir! Something better! Paperwork! He said, his eyes wide with all the thrill of a breakthrough only career archivists could appreciate. It was Form 34C! I was obsessively triple-checking the citation requirements for Question 14B. List any known precursor texts or linguistic ancestors to the subject's primary language. The ambassador mentioned Latin, so I entered it into the archival cross-referencing system. He scurried over to my desk and swiped his datapad, projecting 2 texts side by side in the air. One was a document from a human historical archive he had downloaded from their rudimentary internet. The other was a page from the holiest of holies, the Galactic Council's sacred concordance. Look, sir, Pib said, his trembling finger pointing at the human text. It's from a book called De Agricultura, on agriculture, written by a human named Cato the Elder? He read the highlighted line. Bossi agrito quepet, quam primum proteri vendito. He looked at me expectantly. I didn't need the translator. I had spent my life studying the sacred concordance. The phrase was burned into my memory. I recited the corresponding council precept from the other document, my voice hollow. The progenitors demand we cull the weak from the herd before they become a burden to the whole. The wording was identical, not similar. Identical. A cold, dawning horror washed over me, so immense and profound it felt like a physical weight. Our entire legal philosophy, the bedrock of council law for 3,000 years, the profound wisdom of the mythical founders, was farming advice. Advice on how to sell a sick ox before it died and you lost your money. Pib was scrolling frantically.
There's more, sir. So much more. Precept 112, on the proper tilling of the land, is a direct quote about planting turnips. The entire third book of the Concordance, the rights of communal harmony, it's a chapter on how to make fertilizer from compost.
The sacred Concordance, the divine text that guided our civilization, that Gorthak built his career on, that was about to justify the annihilation of a species, was a farmer's almanac? My mind was reeling. A farmer's almanac. But that didn't explain everything. The Concordance was also filled with tactical advice, military doctrine, and prophetic-sounding pronouncements about war and destiny. It was a bizarre, contradictory mess. I needed to talk to Bob again. I found him in the galley, showing my ship's chef how to properly care for the sourdough starter, Eleanor. The chef, a being with 2 main arms for heavy work and 4 smaller manipulators for delicate tasks, was listening with rapt attention. "Ambassador," I said, interrupting the lesson on gluten development. "May I have another moment? Informally."
Oh, you bet,
Bob said, wiping his hands on a towel.
"What's on your mind, Flynn? You look like you've seen a ghost."
"Something like that," I said, leading him into a quiet corner. "You mentioned the Romans. This language, Latin, you seem to know a great deal about it." Bob's eyes lit up. It was the look of a hobbyist who had just been asked about their passion.
"Oh, the Romans. Fascinating guys. A little stabby for my taste, but they built great roads and even better aqueducts. My wife got me a subscription to a history podcast for my birthday a few years back, and I got hooked. Read all the classics. Tacticus, Livy, whole gang."
"And their military leaders?" I probed gently. "Were their writings preserved?"
"Oh, absolutely." Bob beamed. The big one, of course, is Julius Caesar. His Commentary de Bello Gallico. That's commentaries on the Gallic War. It's a masterpiece of political propaganda disguised as a field report. Every school kid used to have to translate it, full of famous lines. He adopted a dramatic, theatrical pose. "And then there's what he said when he crossed the Rubicon River and started a civil war. A real point-of-no-return moment. He looked at his men and said, 'Alia jacta est.'"
The phrase stole the air from my lungs. "Alia jacta est." It was one of the most sacred lines in the entire Concordance. It was from the Book of Prophecies, Chapter 4. The die is cast. It was believed to be the founder's declaration that the destiny of the universe was fixed and unchangeable. The line was a simple quotation, not a prophecy. The truth crashed down on me with the force of a collapsing star. The crashed probe, the high-resolution scan. The probe had scanned 2 separate books. The sacred Concordance, the foundation of our entire civilization, our religion, our laws, our military doctrine, was a bizarre fusion of 2 human documents. A farmer's almanac and a general's war memoirs. A strange calm settled over me. The anxiety was gone, replaced by a terrifying, exhilarating purpose. I knew what I had to do. The time for quiet diplomacy and cautious inquiries was over. It was time for a little political theater of my own. I strode back to the bridge, my webbed feet slapping against the deck with newfound confidence. "Communications!" I snapped, my voice sharp and clear. "Get me High Counselor Gorthak." A few moments later, the Pompadour's smug face appeared on the screen.
"Dr. Flynn,"
he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy.
"Have you come to your tender resignation? The first ships of the Annihilation Fleet will be arriving in your sector shortly. You may want to find a safe viewing distance."
"On the contrary, High Counselor," I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I am requesting a live, open, mandatory broadcast to the entire Galactic Council, effective immediately." Gorthak's crest feathers ruffled in surprise, then smoothed back down as a cruel grin spread across his beak. He thought he knew what this was. A final, desperate, pathetic plea. A public self-immolation that would only serve to vindicate him completely.
"How delightfully dramatic, Doctor," he purred. "A final address before the righteous work begins. I will grant it, of course. It is important for the Council to witness the consequences of such misguided idolism. The floor is yours."
The screen went blank. "Pib," I said, turning to my intern, who was staring at me with a mixture of awe and terror. "Get Ambassador Jenkins. Tell him we need his help with a comparative linguistics presentation. And Pib, set the main holographic display to project from my datapad. I have a few slides to show." The broadcast went live. My face, small and green, was suddenly projected into every government office, military ready room, and public plaza across dozens of worlds of the Galactic Council. Beside me, on a second, larger holographic display, was the pleasantly confused face of Ambassador Bob Jenkins, live from the galley of the Inquisitive Gesture. "Councilors, members of the esteemed legislative bodies, citizens," I began, my voice ringing with a confidence I didn't know I possessed. "I have come before you today not to offer excuses, but to present evidence. Evidence that will challenge the very foundation of our understanding of the universe, of the founders, and of our new neighbors, the humans." In the corner of the screen, I could see the council chamber. Gorthak was seated on his high perch, looking down with an expression of bored amusement. I projected my first image. It was the sacred symbol for war, a jagged, aggressive glyph known to every child in the council. "Hi, Councilor Gorthak," I said, my voice sharp. "For the record, what is the word for this concept in the sacred tongue of the founders?" Gorthak leaned into his microphone, relishing the moment.
"The word, as every true believer knows," he bellowed, "is bellum."
"Thank you, High Counselor," I said politely. I turned to the other hologram. "Ambassador Jenkins, a simple question for your linguistics presentation. In the ancient human language of Latin, what is the word for war?" Bob smiled, happy to help.
"Oh, that's an easy one. It's bellum."
A low, confused murmur rippled through the council chamber. Gorthak's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. I didn't give them the time to process. I picked up the pace, swiping through my presentation like a prosecutor, revealing undeniable proof. "The sacred word for water," I asked the universe. "Aqua," 1,000 voices would be thinking. "Ambassador?"
"Aqua,"
Bob confirmed, taking a sip from a glass of it. "The sacred word for star." "Stella." "Ambassador?"
"Stella. We have a few famous people here with that name, actually."
"The sacred word for peace."
"Pax."
"Ambassador?"
"Pax. Lovely word. Don't hear it enough."
"Law." "Lex." "Light." "Lux." "King." "Rex." "Soldier." "Miles." "Sword." "Gladius." I rattled them off, one after another. With each matched pair, the murmur in the council chamber grew louder, escalating from confusion to disbelief, from disbelief to a dawning collective shock. The broadcast cut to shots of counselors from different species across the galaxy. A Caladan dignitary's silicate plates began to vibrate audibly. A furry Tolbaxian merchant's ears flattened against his skull. The shell of the Torvine delegation slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to retract into itself. The main camera feed kept cutting back to Gorthak. His magnificent, vibrant crest, once a proud banner of authority, was visibly wilting. The brilliant feathers drooped, losing their luster. His enormous throat sac, the very symbol of his pompadour power and bluster, was deflating with a faint, wheezing hiss, like a party balloon the day after the celebration. His entire platform, his identity, his power base, it was all dissolving, live, in front of the entire civilization he purported to lead. It was time to deliver that final, killing blow. "And now," I said, my voice dropping to a solemn, dramatic tone, "we return to the word that began this crisis." I projected the high-resolution scan of the original document, the page from the ancient Roman probe. I zoomed in on the single fateful word, Terra. "High Counselor, you and the threat assessment filter have concluded that this word is, in fact, terror. Ambassador Jenkins, for the final question in this presentation, in Latin, what is the word for fright or great fear?"
"That would be terror,"
Bob confirmed helpfully.
"Spelled Terror.
"Exactly," I said. "One letter difference. A single, almost insignificant mark." I zoomed the image further, enhancing it until the very texture of the ancient parchment was visible. "Counselors, I draw your attention to this faint smudge. This ink blot that turns the word for dirt into the word for fear." The image clarified, the pixels resolving into a clear shape. "This mark, mistaken for a letter, is an artifact of the original scan, a high-fidelity image of a fossilized terrestrial insect from the order Diptera that was squashed on the page millennia ago." A collective gasp echoed through the council chamber. The mark that had nearly staged a galactic war was a dead fly. "And now, for my final point," I said, twisting the knife. "High Counselor Gorthak, for years you have greeted us, rallied your followers, and signed off your every decree with the mighty cry, SPQR, a cry you believe means for the glory of the Founders." I turned to Bob one last time. His face was a picture of dawning comprehension mixed with nerdy glee. "Ambassador Jenkins, you are a student of Roman history. What does the abbreviation SPQR stand for?" Bob beamed, practically vibrating with the joy of knowing the answer.
"Oh, SPQR, that's the big one. Senatus Populusque Romanus."
He translated for the bewildered galactic audience.
"It means the Senate and the people of Rome. It was basically the official letterhead of the Roman Republic."
The silence that followed was the most profound sound I had ever heard. Gorthak's mighty, fearsome traditional war cry was the ancient equivalent of "Sincerely, the management." Gorthak snapped. The wheezing, deflated politician on the screen suddenly shot to his feet, his crest a pathetic, disheveled mess.
"Heresy!"
he shrieked, his voice a thin, reedy screech.
"Lies! Deception! This is a human trick! A blasphemous attack on our most sacred..."
His microphone cut out. His image flickered and was replaced by the stern, stony face of a different official. It was Fleet Admiral Taggart, the supreme commander of the Council's military forces. She looked completely unflappable, her 4 eyes each moving independently, blinking slowly. "The High Counselor appears to be experiencing technical difficulties," she stated in a clipped, no-nonsense tone. Her gaze swept across the silent council. "The Annihilation Fleet is standing down. All military action is suspended pending a full cultural and historical reassessment." She paused, her gaze finding my camera. "Dr. Flynn, your presence, and that of the human ambassador, is requested at Central Command. We have much to discuss." The broadcast ended. The bridge of the inquisitive gesture was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, my communications officer started to clap. The tactical officer joined in. Then the navigator. Soon the entire bridge crew was applauding. Not with wild enthusiasm, but with the quiet, stunned relief of beings who had just watched their entire worldview get dismantled and then gracefully reassembled in the span of 10 minutes. In the ship's galley, the rich scent of roasting beans hung thick. Bob had insisted on brewing a pot of his special occasion coffee for a dazed and emotionally exhausted Flynn. He handed me a steaming mug.
"So, let me get this straight,"
Bob said, sitting down opposite me and cradling his own mug.
"Your entire moral philosophy, your legal system, your religion, it's all based on a general self-aggrandizing war diary and my grandpa's favorite farming advice?"
I took a slow sip of the hot, bitter liquid. It was surprisingly good. "That appears to be the long and short of it, yes," I said, my voice hoarse. "Our most profound legal precept about culling the weak is actually about selling a sick ox. Our deepest prophecy about cosmic destiny is just a general being dramatic before starting a civil war." Bob shook his head, a slow smile spreading across his face.
"Incredible."
He took a sip of coffee and stared into the middle distance, lost in thought.
"You know," he mused, "there were always these fringe theories back on Earth. History nuts, mostly. They talked about evidence of wealthy Roman patricians experimenting with rocketry. Private ventures, nothing state-sponsored. The math never quite worked out."
He looked at me, his eyes twinkling.
"But imagine this. Some rich, retired general, a guy who made his fortune in the Gallic Wars, decides to go into farming in his old age. Brags about it constantly. For a vanity project, he decides to launch his two favorite books, his own memoirs and the best farming guide on the market, into space, just to prove he can."
Bob chuckled.
"It's the most Roman thing I can possibly imagine."
I stared into my mug. The absurd, ridiculous, almost poetic logic of it all clicked perfectly into place. It was so stupid, so human, so utterly and completely plausible. A final communication from the new Provisional Council arrived. Gorthak, I was informed, had been asked to take an extended, unpaid sabbatical to a remote monastery to contemplate his relationship with the founders. A beautiful piece of corporate speak for fired and exiled. In the same message, I was informed of my new position. I was no longer junior xenolinguist Flynn. I was now head of the newly created Department of Progenitor Studies. My first official task, to lead a joint Glimmerfin human expedition to the city of Rome on Earth for a full archaeological and textual survey. In the background of the Inquisitive Gestures briefing room, Pib stared at the now completed Form 34C on his datapad. His long, terrifying ordeal with Question 23C was finally over. He looked at the checkboxes one last time. Existential threats, blasphemous concepts, crude anatomical references. The name Terra posed no threat, but the revelation that their entire culture was based on a lie was certainly existential. Check. The idea that the founders were just a couple of old Romans was, to a traditionalist like Gorthak, the highest form of blasphemy. Check. Then Pib, in his infinite, obsessive diligence, had looked up the etymology of gladius, the sacred word for sword. He discovered it was also a common slang term for a certain part of the male human anatomy. He smirked, and with a flourish of profound satisfaction, checked the third box as well. He hit submit. A wave of immense, cathartic relief washed over him. His ordeal was over. Bob clapped me on the back, jarring me from my reverie. "Well, looks like you've got a big new job, Flynn. Congratulations." He winked. "Don't worry about the trip to Rome. First tour's on me. You ever tried biscotti? It's an old Roman invention. Hard as rock, but it's the perfect thing to dunk your